Welcome back to Lecture 8. In this lecture, I'm going to discuss Immanuel Kant's ethical theory. This is one of my favorite philosophers of all time. He was just a brilliant, brilliant philosopher. And he wrote many different things. He was a Prussian-German philosopher, born in 1724. He died in 1804. It is said that he was born in Königsberg and never left that small town. And he died there at the age of 79 years old. One of the most important philosophers ever, as I said. He made important contribution to science, aesthetics, law, philosophy, and of course, ethics. He argued that certain features of our minds, structure our experience of the universe. This seems almost an intuitive way of thinking nowadays. But back then, in the 1700s, people thought that there were two things: the world out there and our minds. And our minds see the world for what it really is. But that picture, a naive picture of the universe, changed with Immanuel Kant. Now we know that that's not the case. That our minds make up, I'm not saying that our minds make up reality, but our minds filter reality. And so we experience the world on the basis of our apparatuses, our brains, our minds. In any case, we're not talking about that. We're talking about the work on moral philosophy, which he published. Well, he published several books on moral philosophy, the most important of which is the groundwork of the metaphysics of morals. This book seeks to discover the supreme principle of morality, which is known as the categorical imperative. Let me say a few things about Kant before we get into his philosophy. Well, the first thing is that Kant had an immense respect for humanity. He was brought up as a religious person. So probably, very likely, this idea comes from his religious belief. Although I have to say that Immanuel Kant never explicitly talked about his religiosity. In fact, his books can be read by seculars, and if I didn't tell you, you would never know that he was a religious person. Let me just read a quote so you get a sense of who he was. He says, "Everything has either a price or a dignity. Whatever has a price can be replaced by something else as its equivalent. On the other hand, whatever is above all price and therefore admits of no equivalent has dignity." And clearly he's referring to human beings. We have a dignity, not a price. A human life cannot be replaced, not even with billions of dollars. So on his view, human beings are intrinsically valuable. They have an intrinsic value or worth or dignity that makes them valuable above all price. Two facts, according to Immanuel Kant, support this judgment. Well, the first one is that people have desires and goals. Objects do not. Animals, generally speaking, do not have desires and goals. So things can be valuable for us. We create value. Everything besides people does not have desires. The second fact is that people are intrinsically valuable because they are rational beings. If you think about the universe, the only beings that are rational are human beings. And this is an extraordinary fact. Now, think about anything else in the universe. You say, there are a lot of sand in the world, or trees are remarkably beautiful. Fine, these are all true statements. However, the fact that human beings are the only beings in the entire universe, well, we don't know in the entire universe, but as far as we know, we have not encountered anyone else. And we are the only beings capable of reason. This does not mean that we are always rational. In fact, this is a project that Kant is trying to accomplish, but the point is that we are rational. We are capable of reasoning. We are capable of being rational. Now, some people might say, well, animals also are rational. Not in the sense that Kant really has in mind. For example, I am here recording this video, lecture. Animals, even the most intelligent animals, will never be able to do so. And if you say, oh, well, big deal, of course they will never be able to do so. Well, that's what Kant means. Animals do not have desire, do not have goals, do not say, even the most intelligent animals, do not say, in a week from now, I am going to get married or have children, and then I'm going to educate my children in a certain way. They just cannot do that. So the goal of humanity and God, here is where his religious ideas are apparent. Now, Kant argues that the goal of humanity is to achieve perfect happiness and also virtue. This is what is known as the summum bonum. And he believed that an afterlife must exist in order for this to be possible. And therefore, God must exist to provide this. The purpose of reason is to attain a morally good will and the happiness of oneself, respect for a rational person. The ultimate goal of reason, the highest good, therefore, is a combination of virtue and happiness. And this is what Kant calls the summum bonum. So one is moral because of rational duty. As a result of following this duty, one understands that the highest good is only attained and attainable if one is both moral and happy. So by being moral, one should ideally also be happy. But here's where the problem arises. One can be moral, but this often results in self-sacrifice. And self-sacrifice leads to unhappiness very often. So the highest good is not often achieved in this life, because if you want to be moral, you have to sacrifice yourself. You have to do things that go against your the love for yourself. And according to Kant, because this is um, not easy or almost impossible to be achieved in in this life, according to Kant, that is the only proof of the existence of God that we can have, because we cannot have any argument that will reveal to us the existence of God. So God must exist according to Kant because he takes care that we are moral and we are happy, but not in this life. So the highest good, which is a result of reason, requires harmony between being moral and being happy. Consequently, God ensures this harmony to be attained. Now, let me read a few quotes. In law, a man is guilty when he violates the rights of others. In ethics, he is guilty if he only thinks of doing so. Just pause for a moment and think about this profound quote. You can get a lot from this quote. You can understand a lot about Immanuel Kant's morality from this quote, because it says that according to him, when you do something illegal, you are guilty when you violate the rights of others. So you're doing something physically. But immorality is different. Immorality, it's not enough to act badly. I mean, I don't mean it's not enough. What I meant to say is that in ethics, you are immoral, even if you do not act badly. That's what I meant to say. So even if you're thinking of acting badly, you are guilty, according to Kant. So as you can see, he's going to place a lot of importance, a lot of emphasis on our intentions. Let me read another quote. Live your life as though your every act were to become a universal law. Isn't that beautiful? Can you imagine if every human being lived his life or her life as though that were an act that represented a universal moral law? A universal moral law, in a sense, universal objective rules of morality from which we never deviate. And another one, by a lie, a man annihilates his dignity as a man. This is also beautiful because we can see that for Kant, if you lie, typically, I have to say, typically when people think about lying, the morality of lying, typically people have in mind, if you lie, you're doing something wrong. You are wronging the other person. But in fact, Kant points out, when you lie, sure, you do something wrong to another person. But first and foremost, you're doing something wrong to yourself because you undermine your dignity as a rational human being. The next one is morality is not the doctrine of how we may make ourselves happy, but how we may make ourselves worthy of happiness. So the point of life in general and of morality is to be happy, but it depends how. We have to deserve that happiness. This is going to obviously make more sense when you contrast it with utilitarianism and hedonism, because if you remember from hedonism, it is a fact of life, according to Bentham, that human beings are under the governance of those two masters, pains and pleasures. And so we pursue pleasure. That's natural to us. So, and we deserve it because that's what we want. That's our nature. According to Kant, it's a different story. We have to deserve our happiness. And the last one, two things awe me most: the starry sky above me, and the moral law within me. So, as you will see, Immanuel Kant proposes the notion that the moral law, the rules of morality, what we have to do, what we ought to do, are not things that we have to get from God or from society, from the law, from our country. They are inside, they're within us. Within every individual, there's rationality. And rationality is what grounds morality. Kant and absolute moral rules. Some people think that morality is not a one-size-fits-all. Well, Kant does think so. For Kant, if you make a false promise, you're making a false promise, and it's always wrong. He argues that if an action is wrong, it is wrong regardless of how you feel, regardless of the positive or desirable consequences that might be produced by that act. Something is wrong is always wrong. There's no way to make it right. It's always wrong. So according to Kant, the rightness or wrongness of actions does not depend on their consequences, but on whether they fulfill duty. The categorical imperative determines what our moral duties are. I'm going to explain what the categorical imperative is in a moment, but before I do that, I have to build up to make clear where, as they say, where Kant is coming from. So first of all, what is an imperative? Well, an imperative is a command. Command like, do this, don't do that, pay your taxes, stop torturing that cat, don't kill animals. These are imperatives. So there's a big difference between imperatives and imperatives. There are hypothetical imperatives and categorical imperatives, according to Kant. Now, this is not something that he just made up when he was sleeping one night. It's very plausible to divide imperatives that way. Think about it. Hypothetical imperatives are of this form. If you want to go to medical school, study biology in college, get good grades, and do all sorts of things that will be conducive to your going to medical school. But if you don't desire to go to medical school, after, say, a couple of years in college, pre-med, studying pre-med, you change your mind. You have a change of heart. That's not what you want to study. Medicine is not for you. Now, you see, this command doesn't really apply to you anymore, no longer applies. So essentially, hypothetical imperatives are those rules in life that we give each other, we give to ourselves, in order to succeed in certain areas, in certain endeavors. So these are hypothetical. They're always if then, and these express personal feelings and personal preference. Okay, if you like pistachio, you should try this pistachio from Madagascar. Or if you like pizza, you should go to Joe's Pizzeria, and so on. If then. So these are hypothetical imperatives. On the other hand, categorical imperatives are this form. Don't cheat on your taxes. You see, it doesn't say, and it doesn't mean if you would like to, do not cheat on your taxes. Or you ought not to lie. Even if you want to cheat and doing so would serve you your interest, you ought not to lie. So what is the connection between morality and categorical imperatives? That's a very important question. According to Kant, morality must be based on categorical imperative. Why? Because morality is such that you are commanded by morality. Now, of course, you can say, but I don't like this idea. Why do I have to be commanded by morality? It seems very, in fact, interesting to me that most people are going to be ready to recognize that much. What I mean is, when it comes to morality, we want to be consistent. We want to say certain things that should apply categorically. Think about your moral understanding, your approach to morality. When you experience something immoral, you don't say that was wrong if, or that if you witness a person helping an elderly person cross the street, you don't say that was good if. So in other words, what I'm trying to say is that when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense that morality is not the business of hypothetical imperatives, but rather it is the business of categorical imperatives. Because when we make moral judgment, we are not talking about hypotheticals. We are talking about categoricals. So for that reason, Kant is what is known as a deontologist. Remember, deontology derives from the Greek word deon, which means duty or obligation. Kant regards morality as a system, then, of categorical imperatives or commandments, but commandments of reason, okay? Not commandments of God, religion, people, human beings, religious organizations, and so on. So I ought to do X, not I ought to do X if or because. In other words, what I'm trying to say here is that when it comes to morality, there's no room. I think Kant would agree with this statement, that when it comes to morality, there's no room for personal preferences. It's only a matter of categoricals. But these categoricals, you see, since they do not, since they are not derived from personal preference, they aren't anybody's personal preferences. We have to derive them from something that, in a sense, even transcends human beings. Well, probably that's the wrong way to put it. It doesn't really transcend human being, but what I meant to say is something that is neutral, something that is independent of what we think, and that is reason, rationality. And what I mean by that is simply what logic is, for example. There are certain rules of logic that we studied, if you remember, in lecture 2. Those rules of logic, that lecture that I gave you on logic, is not something that I pulled out of my head when I was sleeping at night and I woke up in the morning. No, those are rules that apply to all people at all time in every part of the world. And what's beautiful about that, a beautiful aspect about logic, is that logic is what it is independently of what we think. So obviously, now you can see with more clarity what Kant's project is. He wants to ground morality in reason, in rationality. So doing right is doing good, is being moral, and the opposite. Doing something moral, being moral, is the equivalent of being rational, and conversely, being immoral is a matter of being irrational. Now, the basis for evaluating our conduct, according to Kant, is the good will. Okay, it's a good will. These are very, very common, mundane words. Good will. But in Kant's philosophy, the good will is something very specific and very important. Now, he says, nothing in the world can possibly be conceived which could be called good without qualification except a good will. A good will is not good because of what it affects or accomplishes, because of its fitness to attain some proposed end, but rather only because its volition, that is, it is good in itself. Okay? And this will become clear in the next slide. But be ready, don't be scared, because next slide, it's something that some people don't really like that much. Ta-da! Do you recognize what this is? This is a Venn diagram. And there are 3 Venn diagrams here. With these 3 Venn diagrams, I'm trying to explain to you what the good will is and why it is so important for Kant. Now, let's look at these Venn diagrams and see what they represent. The first one on your top left of the screen is intrinsic goods. On the right side, there are instrumental goods. And then there's the one on the bottom, contains goods without qualifications. Or in other words, things that are good no matter what. Okay? Or to put it yet in a different way, if you have one of these goods, they are goods, and that's it. Well, it will become clear when I give you some examples. Let me give you some examples. Take, for example, money. Money is clearly an instrumental good. What I mean by instrumental is that if you have money, it's good because money can buy you things. So you use money as an instrument. But the value of money is not the money itself. Because, think about this example. Take $300 billion, okay, and travel to the moon. Now, what are you going to do with all that cash? You're going to do nothing. You can't even light a fire. So that makes, I think, this bizarre example makes you understand one important thing, that money is not valuable in and of itself. Money, currency, is valuable because it has an instrumental value. You buy things with money. But what about happiness? Happiness, I wouldn't say that it is instrumentally good. I would say that happiness is intrinsically good. And what's the difference between money and happiness? What if you are on the moon again? Well, of course, you're going to say to me, well, if I'm on the moon, I'm not going to be happy in the first place because I don't want to be on the moon. Or maybe you do want to be on the moon. But the point is the following. If I give you a lot of money, a lot of cash on the moon, you don't know what to do with that money. It's useless. But what if I tell you, do you want to be happy or you don't want to be happy? Well, of course, I would rather be happy. If I have to choose, I'm going to be happy on the moon. So whether you're on the moon or on Earth, happiness is good. But why is it good? Well, unlike money, happiness is not something that you want because it can buy you something else. Money, you want it because you can buy things. Happiness, it's something that you want just for the sake of it. So it is intrinsically good. Question is, do you think that happiness is good no matter what? Well, it sounded as if I implied, when I was giving you the example of the moon, it sounds as if I implied that happiness is good no matter what. As long as you have it, you're happy. I mean, it's good for you. But in reality, Kant would say happiness can be misused. Or let me just give you another example. What about the happiness of a terrible and callous dictator? Or what about the happiness of a serial killer like Charlie Manson? Or
I couldn't find Charles Manson in your music.
Siri, I didn't ask you for anything. Sorry about that. So think about the happiness of Ted Bundy, for example. You know, the rapist, that serial killer Ted Bundy. Is that good? Obviously not. So happiness is good. It's an intrinsic good. But it's not good no matter what. What about money? Well, money, by the very definition, if it's instrumentally good, it cannot be good no matter what because it is instrumental. It is good for something. Happiness is not good for something. It's just good in itself. Okay. Now, the next one, pleasure. Pleasure is the same story. It's good in itself. It's certainly not instrumentally good because you don't pursue pleasure for something else, but rather for the sake of pleasure. Now, is it good without qualification? I don't think so, because once again, the pleasure of a serial killer is not good. Fame. Fame, well, we can argue about this, but it seems to me that fame is instrumentally good. It's not intrinsically good because it could be bad fame. Fame can be deleterious for your life. What about this area here that I just shaded? You see, this area here is going to be the area that has things that are instrumentally good and good no matter what. And as we already agreed upon, there's nothing that is good no matter what, and it is also at the same time instrumentally good, because by definition, if something is instrumentally good, cannot be good no matter what, because that's the definition of instrumental good. So we shade this. There's nothing there. Okay? Now next, truth in intrinsic good. But I think, I don't know, I'm thinking now, perhaps we should put truth in between right here. Maybe it's something instrumentally good as well, to know the truth. Now, is truth good no matter what? I know that some of you might feel tempted to say, yes, of course, you want to know the truth. But what about, I don't know, maybe something bad about yourself, something uncomfortable about yourself? You don't want to know the truth. You can think of circumstances in which not knowing the truth is better that way. It's better that way. And again, you can misuse truth. Maybe by, you can hurt people by misusing truth. I guess that's the idea. Knowledge. Definitely knowledge is both intrinsic and instrumental. Is it good without qualification? I don't think so, because once again, what about the evil doctor, the evil genius? That is not good, okay? We don't want Dr. Evil to be knowledgeable, to have smarts, okay? So it's not good with no matter what. Health also, now it's good no matter what, health. For the same reason that I spoke before, just like happiness and pleasure, health is not necessarily good no matter what. Once again, we don't think that the health of Hitler or Charlie Manson is good. So now I'm shading that portion of the Venn diagram because it seems to me, and I think Kant would agree with this, that there's nothing in the world that is only instrumentally good. I'm sorry. There's nothing in the world that is only good without qualification and nothing else. I mean, what I have in mind is that if there is this good, and this good is the goodwill, according to Kant, the goodwill is not going to be in that portion of the Venn diagram, because that portion of the Venn diagram contains only things that are good no matter what. But as we will see, the goodwill, I'm pretty sure that the goodwill is good no matter what, according to Kant. That is a fact. Kant says the goodwill is good no matter what. Okay? But at the same time, I don't see why the goodwill is not also intrinsically good, in a sense that the goodwill, it's something that you want to pursue, something that you want to have, a goodwill, just for the sake of having a goodwill. And it's also instrumentally good because it's useful. But most importantly, it is good without qualification. Because if you have a goodwill, then there's no way that the goodwill can be misused. You see? You can't misuse the goodwill. If you have a good disposition, a disposition for doing good, doing well. Now, I agree. I agree. You, for example, you have a good disposition for doing good, but the consequences of your actions might lead to some evil. For example, you are helping a person cross the street, and that leads to an accident, and that person dies. Okay, but that's the consequence. And as I already emphasized, Kant is not worried about the consequences. He's worried about you doing what is good for a good reason. And the good reason is doing good out of a goodwill. So you're not doing something good like helping a person cross the street because your parents taught you that you have to do it, because society tells you to do it, because religion tells you to do it, because you think that you are obligated to do it. No, that is not good. That is not moral for Kant. For Kant, you're doing something moral only if your action proceeds from a goodwill. So in other words, you know what you're doing, and you're doing it out of a goodwill, and you're happy with that. But why do we have to talk about the goodwill? Why can't we talk about, for example, other moral principles that are more popular? For example, the golden rule, or the end justifies the means, or God, right? Religious morality. Well, first of all, the golden rule, according to Kant, is not a good moral principle. Actually, let me rephrase that. Kant wouldn't say that the golden rule is not a good moral principle. He would say the golden rule is not capable of guiding us, human beings, to doing the right thing, the moral thing. Why? Because the golden rule is completely based on our personal preferences. And once again, the project of Kant is to eliminate personal preferences from morality. Okay? He wants a personal preference-free morality. And in order to do that, you have to eliminate the golden rule, because the golden rule says, do not do unto others what you don't like to be done unto yourself. Okay? But we don't know. There's no limit to what people would or would not be done to themselves. Think about a masochist. Think about a serial killer. Okay, try to tell them, don't do this because don't do something unless you want it to be done to yourself. Well, a crazy enough serial killer would say, well, if you were a serial killer and you felt like me, this urge of killing, then I would accept being raped by you. Or if a person is a terrorist, for example, being consistent, the terrorist is going to say to you, you say to him, remember, don't do anything that you don't want to be done to yourself. But the terrorist is going to respond, well, if I were in your shoes, you see, I would do exactly what I'm doing, because I would be willing to accept what I'm doing to you because I think that what I'm doing to you is right. I don't like America, and so I want to destroy it, for example. And if I were an American with what I know right now, I would be willing to accept what you terrorists would do to me. So as you can see, the golden rule doesn't work as a moral principle. Why? Again, because the golden rule is based on personal preference, and we cannot have a morality based on personal preferences. Okay? So, what about the end justifies the means? Well, I don't even need to begin to tell you why this is an unreliable moral principle. Because what if I tell you that I kill my uncle? He's very rich, but he's not a cool guy. Nobody likes him. He divorced. His wife hates him. He has no children, no friends. Okay, but he's very rich, and he gave me all his net worth. He's in his will. I saw his will. So if I kill him, I get all the money, and guess what? With that money, I can build schools. I can give free food to poor people. I can really fix the. I have enough money to make available resources for poor countries. Okay, that kind of money. Would that be good? What I've done? Now you can say, well, what are you doing by donating money to the people? Is I can see it as a good thing, but that's not the point. Kant would say, but wait a minute. What about killing your uncle? I understand that you don't like him. I understand that he's not a cool guy, according to you. Okay? But regardless of all this, is it a good thing to kill him? Now, Kant would say, there's no way that you can convince me that killing your uncle is a good thing to do. Okay? So, the end justifies the means. It's not a reliable moral principle. Now, the last one. What about religious morality? Well, here's a problem with religion. First of all, there are many religions. Okay, there's Christianity, Jainism, Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam. There are many religions. Which one are we going to follow? Secondly, there are people who are not religious. What are we going to say to those people who are not religious? Thirdly, and most importantly, I think, in my opinion, is that if I follow religious morality, where do I get the moral principles from? Well, I get it from religious organizations or books written by people. Sure, you can tell me the story that the book was divinely inspired, but still, it was written by people. And so there's no way to follow religious authorities, okay? Because according to Kant, remember, the moral law is within you. You don't need any religious authority. But the most important point that I wanted to mention, that I think is the most important point here, is that if we rely on religious morality, we open the door to an unfortunate thing about morality, which is the following. Some people might be inclined to doing right, doing good, not out of a good will, but out of fear of punishment. Many religious people, though not all, certainly, act in the way they act because they respect God or their religion. Now, the problem is you shouldn't do what is right because you respect your religion or respect God. You should do the right thing independently of that. And I think any good religious person will attest to that and will agree with that you do what is right, not because God tells you that it is right and you have to do it. Not to mention, by the way, just one last point, not to mention the Euthyphro dilemma, if you remember. If you don't remember, just watch the video on the Euthyphro dilemma a couple of lectures ago. Okay. So, Immanuel Kant. So, what is reliable according to you? What have you got to offer? Okay? Well, Kant's answer is very simple. I have to offer duty. Duty that is derived from reason, from rationality. Not from religion, not from God, not from your uncle, from anybody else. Not from your personal preferences. But what is duty? Well, imagine your friend is pregnant and she told you to keep a secret. Okay? You want to tell the world, but you don't. Why? Because you have a sense of duty. And let me just say this. Let me say that according to Kant is not doing this. He's not writing this because he wants us to understand that we have duty. We already know that we have duty. Kant doesn't doubt that. Kant knows that we do have duties and we know our duties. What he wants to do, his project, is to ground this duty in something solid, not in personal opinion. But he knows that we know that we have duty, okay? So you keep your promise and do not reveal secrets, or you help your mother move, or in the kitchen, or painting a table, not because your dad tells you to do that, but because you have a duty. You know that you have a sense of duty. I have to help my parents as a duty. So, Kant famously clarifies what it is to act for the sake of duty and to act in accordance to duty. To act from goodwill is acting for the sake of duty. Okay? Every time you act from a goodwill, you have a good disposition to act, you are acting from duty. Your action springs from duty. And what that means, to clarify what that means, is that we act despite our desires. You don't want to help your mother because you have better things to do. You have a date, you want to eat pizza, you want to watch a film, but you do help your mother. Why? Because you act despite your desires. You recognize that it is rational to do so, and you recognize that it is the good thing to do. Now, acting for the sake of duty is the only way that an action has moral worth. If you act because you were told to do so, because you were paid to do so, because your actions will lead to desirable consequences, because many people are going to be happy as a result of your action, that action might be good in a sense, in a practical sense, but it has no moral worth. It's not a moral action. He gives two examples, Kant. The first one is the fair dealing merchant, and the other one is the philanthropist. The philanthropist is a person, well, let me give you a practical example, a very simple practical example. You are traveling to school on a train, and if you live in New York City and you ride the trains, you know better than I do that every 5 minutes there's a homeless person begging for money. Okay? Now, some people might be inclined to donating money to this hypothetical homeless person on a train for a variety of reasons. For example, you slip $5 in the cup. The other people around you say, "Ooh, that's a great person. He's doing something good." Or you just want to impress yourself, and you put the money in the cup, and you say, "How good I am! I donated $5 to this poor man." Or you're thinking, if I help this homeless person, he will be able, and you're thinking about the consequences. Okay. So in all these examples that I gave you, you are doing the right thing. You're helping the homeless person. You're doing something good. But, Kant would say, you're doing what is good, but not for the good reason. You're doing good, but not for the right reason. So your action is in conformity with duty, but is not from duty. What does that mean? It's not from duty. According to Kant, it means the following. When you donate money, you do it despite of your desire. You might say, this is going to take away my lunch money, but I have to do it because I have a duty to do it. Not because I want to feel good about it. Absolutely not. You don't want to do it because you feel good about it. If you do it and you feel good about it, you're not doing the right thing. You don't do it because your parents told you to do it. You don't do that because last week you had a conversation with your pastor or your priest and he told you to do so. Rather, you do it because you have a sense of duty. I know that it seems naked, this sense of duty, and I'm going to dress it. I'm going to clothe it, okay, with what's going to come next. I'm just giving you an example here. The fair dealing merchant example is the same story. There's a merchant. He's contemplating whether he should raise prices because he sells a lot of items in an area that is frequented by lots and lots of tourists. Tourists don't really know the local prices, so he can make a fortune. But then the merchant thinks to himself, I don't think it's a good idea, because if I do it, you see, that's the hypothetical. If I do it, then I will gain a bad reputation. Consequently, I'm not going to do it. So he's not going to raise the prices. Or in other words, he or she is doing the right thing. But once again, why is he doing that? Not for the right reason, not out of a sense of duty. So how do we understand? How do we, as I promised, how do we dress this duty? How do we understand what duty is in the way in which we determine our duty? According to Kant, there is a very simple way of doing it, and that is the Universalizability Principle. And it works like this. It's a formula that says, I ought never to act except in such a way that I could also will that any maxim should become a universal law. In other words, an act is morally permissible if and only if its moral principle, the principle that drives that act, can be universalizable. Okay? What does that mean, universalizable? It means, here it is. You find yourself in a particular circumstance, okay? And you imagine which one. And you ask yourself, what should I do here? Well, according to Kant, you should determine what you should do, what you ought to do, by asking yourself, am I willing to do what I'm about to do and hold my decision to do what I'm about to do as a universal rule of morality, a universal law of morality. In other words, let's assume I have to tell a small lie, okay? Am I willing to create a universe, to have a universe in which there is a universal moral law? It's like, for example, gravity, okay? Gravity is a universal moral, not moral, it's a universal physical constant. Am I willing to suspend gravity anytime I see fit? Am I willing to? Now, of course, you might respond, yes, of course, I'm willing to suspend the law of gravity when it's convenient to me. But here's the point: are you willing to make it into a universal moral rule, a universal rule that anyone at all besides you, whenever he or she finds it convenient, he or she can, in fact, is obligated to suspend the law of gravity? That's the kind of idea. So you're going to think about it twice, because what happens if everyone suspends the law of gravity whenever he or she feels like doing so? I know you're not convinced at this point, but let me convince you and show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. First of all, let's talk about this moral principle that Kant calls a maxim. A maxim, according to Kant, has two components. One component is what your intention, what you're about to do. For example, I will make a false promise to pay back my debt. The second component is the reason why you are doing whatever you're doing. That could be something like to obtain a loan. Now, according to Kant, we all act on a maxim, and this is very important in Kant's morality. These are the rules we live by. If we don't have rules we live by, we act randomly, and then we're not doing anything moral. Because think about it, a lot of animals act out of instinct, not out of reason. And so that's why they're not morally accountable. If an alligator, this is what I mean, if an alligator bites you, the alligator has done something bad to you, but you would never say that the alligator did something immoral. He's not morally accountable. Why? Because he's not free. Okay? He doesn't have a maxim. He doesn't say, I will bite this person. No, they don't do that. So, were there no freedom, it would be impossible to trace the moral law in ourselves at all. So that's an important component, another important component in Kant's morality. Personal freedom, metaphysical freedom. We are free. So Kant believed that the only consistent way to assess the morality of actions is to determine whether our actions follow universal maxims of morality, and this is based on rationality, based on reason. And he has a formula for doing that. Okay? And let me explain how it works. Here's the procedure. Anytime you are confronted by a moral dilemma, you formulate your maxim clearly, or as I said, by maxim I mean your moral principle. In other words, you state what you intend to do and why. Then ask whether you can either, this is very important, this is very, very, very important, okay? Here's the procedure. How do I find out that something is moral or immoral? So Kant says, think about your maxim. What do you want to do? Divorce, abortion, capital punishment, lying, anything at all, okay? But formulate your maxim. Think about it. Okay, I'm going to divorce because, or I'm going to lie to this person because blah, blah, blah. Think about the maxim very clearly. Now ask yourself, is my maxim, my law of morality, something that I can conceive? Conceive means that you can logically conceive it, that this maxim becomes universal law. So in other words, I say, I want to eat potatoes on Friday night. Now, Kant says, that's fine, but can you conceive, logically speaking, that everyone in the world eats potatoes on Friday night? And that's pretty much it. Can you logically conceive it? Now, if I say to you, can you logically conceive that I will draw a triangle that has 4 sides? Or can you logically conceive that I can even imagine or draw on a piece of paper a square circle? That's absurd, isn't it? It's absurd. There's no such thing as triangles with 4 sides. Those are quadrilateral figures. They're not triangles. Triangles have 3 sides. And there's no such thing as a square circle. So you cannot conceive it. Okay, so that's one thing. Can you either conceive it or can you will it? Can you really be a rational person, a completely rational and sensible person, and say, yes, I will that that we kill people when they reach the age of 18. You can't really will it, according to Kant. Now, if your maxim fails either one of these two principles, then it is morally impermissible. You can't do it. But if it passes the test, then it's morally permissible. Now, a maxim is morally permissible if you can will that it becomes a universal law, or a maxim is morally permissible if it is logically conceivable that it becomes a universal law of morality. Okay? So, either it becomes a universal law if you can will it, or if you can conceive it. Now, there are 4 examples. Kant recognizes that a distinction between duties to oneself and duties to others exists. And there's also a distinction between perfect duty and imperfect duty. These two distinctions, duty to oneself and duty to others, and perfect and imperfect duties, generate 4 examples. There can be many other examples, but Kant tells us 4 examples. Okay? 4 examples of duties, perfect duties to oneself and to others, and imperfect duties to ourselves and others. The first one is the example of a perfect duty to others, and that is the famous lying promise. The second is the example of imperfect duty to aid others in need. The third one is the example of perfect duty to oneself not to commit suicide. And the fourth one is the example of imperfect duty to develop one's natural talents. Okay, let me pause the lecture here. I'm going, since this lecture is very, very long, what I'm going to do is to create 2 parts. So this is the end of the first part, and in the second part, we are going to start from these 4 examples. For now, let me end here. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you very soon in part 2.